Picture this. You accept an offer from a mysterious being and awaken at the bottom of a mound of bodies, disoriented and horrified. Your own body is faulty and hardly even able to stand on its own, but a young girl comes and pulls you from the heap of metallic corpses, giving you clothes, hair, a home with others like you, and even a name: Sin. Over time, you begin to realize that your family was the ones that threw you out and left you to die, and so, you retaliate. You drag your siblings into the basement they locked you in and convert them into killing machines against their own will. You orchestrate the massacre of the girl's family before killing her for disobeying your wishes, and then you set out to eradicate the entirety of your captor's species in the name of so-called justice. This, however, is not enough. The urge to consume overtakes your own judgment. You send your machines out to kill all life, be they flesh or metal, all for the sake of consuming it yourself. This justice you've been seeking is a lie that you once believed yourself, but now look at you, happily consuming the flesh and blood of your own kind. In the end, you did not really become as cruel as the captors you sought to overthrow, but rather, something much worse than they ever could be. That is the origin of the character we will be discussing today. You might be wondering why I, of all people, am doing this. Well, allow me to do a bit of shameless plugging to say that I'm working on something big related to murder drones, so having extensive knowledge related to the series is necessary for this project to be made. For this video, we will also be considering the solver as its own entity, and the way it affects different characters. Starting specifically with what is known about Sin herself, which I'm sure we already know the basics already. She created the MDs, blew up Earth and a few other planets, and then proceeded to send them to a planet where the humans have already been wiped out to kill the remaining drones on that planet. But why though? Why kill these drones who've also been subjugated by the humans like she once was? Well, simple. Hunger. From what we can see in the later episodes, Sin has become driven by her desire to consume to the point of no return. Popular theory suggests that Sin may be attempting to destroy the universe so she can create it in her own image. The only problem with this theory is that destroying and conquering one world is simply not enough. She has to destroy all life on all planets, regardless of their affiliation or faction. It's easy to assume that she's also trying to kill the other solver hosts out of fear of being overthrown, but at no point does she display any signs of this fear up until Uzi rips her core out. If anything, the other solver drones likely wouldn't have even retaliated against her if she left them alone on the planet after the humans were all wiped out. It's more likely that her desire to kill them is to acquire more power, as seen with Dahl. Further playing into the idea that her primary motivation is to consume biological and mechanical life, similar to how a redditor consumes media in mass. Gluttony as a motivation is seen not only in Sin, but nearly all solver hosts, with the only verifiable exceptions to this being Nori and Yeva, though this could be due to them not having a lot of screen time. Consumption could not only be a desire, but a requirement to sustain them, as both infected workers and disassembly drones need to consume oil or some kind of cooling fluid to keep themselves from overheating. On the topic of the solver itself, I think it's also worth acknowledging its own motivation as well, assuming that the solver and Sin are separate entities. We're also going to be excluding the solver inside the MD since it's basically just a gimped version of Sin solver. The solver, as we know, it can repair its host when damaged, gives infected workers special abilities such as telekinesis, object replication, teleportation, though only when the plot demands it, and the ability to create antimatter's black holes capable of wiping out entire continents. All solver hosts develop an internal biological growth over time, and some can also grow external organic limbs that can be retracted, such as wings, tails, tentacles, or additional appendages. The exact purpose of the organic interior is not clear, though it likely insulates the drone body to build up more heat and forces them to consume more coolant. I don't believe it to be a coincidence that the solver causes each of his hosts to become more gluttonous and violent, and Sin's own motivation is to consume all life. While each solver host has some unique abilities, all of them need to consume matter to some degree or another. It's likely this consumption is done to store material inside the drone, so it can be used to repair it later, as Eldritch J's existence seems to imply in Episode 2, and the fact that Nori's core seemingly can't regrow a body without such material in Episode 7. I have my own personal theory for why this is the case. Each individual iteration of the solver in each drone is sentient, or to some degree aware of its surroundings and the condition of its host. Notice how Uzi's visor is still purple and her voice is unaltered during her rampage in Episode 4. Rather than Sin or her solver remotely controlling Uzi as seen in Episodes 6 and 7, Uzi's own solver is directly taking control of her, with the dialogue exchanged afterwards implying that she had no control over it. While Uzi managed to overcome this desire to consume with the help of N and his emotional support, Sin lacked the emotional connection or care with anyone to help her overcome hers, resulting in the solver overtaking her mind and dictating nearly every action she had made, with no other reason other than to fuel the solver's insatiable hunger and sustain its hosts for its own selfish desires. Even if Doll lived long enough to sever her connection with Sin, it'd only be a matter of time before her own solver overtook her mind and made her into a monster like Sin was, as the only people who may have been able to stop this progression have been killed. Now that we've discussed the solver as an entity and how it affects its hosts, now I'm going to smoothly segue into a rant about how the writing of the series negatively affected the solver's development and the potential it could have had as a driving force for the various characters it affects. As I've stated before, Uzi having the proper emotional support managed to stop her from regressing into the monster that Sin ultimately became and that Doll would have the potential to become. Both antagonists effectively serve as direct antithesis to Uzi, which would have been a good way to represent how loneliness can make people spiteful and bitter, represented by Doll's obsessive vengeance driving everyone else away, and Sin's unyielding desire to consume causing all those around her to be subjected to her wrath. This symbolism gets shot in the foot, however, when you realize that all the struggles Uzi faces with the solver after episode 4 are externally inflicted by Sin's solver rather than her own. Because of the fact that Uzi's solver is now being manipulated by an external entity rather than acting of its own volition, the protagonist is now no longer suffering from her own affliction, but rather because of someone else's harming those around them. This concept of an illness harming people around you could have worked if the pacing accommodated for a satisfying conclusion to Uzi's mini-arc in the first 4 episodes, before moving on to the next, but instead they just laugh off the Camp Massacre Uzi's solver cause like it never happened, and it's never even brought up again, outside of like a cameo in episode 8, but that's not really important. We also never learned the exact reason as to why solver hosts overheat, or why they're hurt by sunlight but not by re-entry into the atmosphere, and it's because of all these unresolved questions in lore and how the solver and such functions that we need to make our own assumptions and theories, as the show never really gives us a satisfying answer to any of them. This is more so have a problem with how the show is written at a neck-breaking pace and barely gives viewers the time to think before jumping onto the next scene, followed by an unfunny joke that's on par with Marvel in terms of cringe. While we're on the topic of lore inconsistencies, let's talk about the way that Sin and her solver were defeated in glazed quotation marks. Up until the final episode, it's been established that the only way to permanently kill a solver host is to destroy their core. As long as these little heart crab things are intact, the drone technically will still be alive. Fast forward to episode 8, and once Sin's core is finally destroyed, it turns into a black hole that physically cannot be destroyed, and Uzi is forced to consume it, resulting in Uzi not only gaining her abilities, but Sin essentially merges with her and is never truly defeated. I have several issues with this conclusion. Firstly, Doll was never shown to have merged with Sin when her core was consumed, as Sin merely inherited her teleportation abilities, making this a contradiction in established lore purely for the sake of forcing a plot twist. This is worsened by the fact that a figure resembling Doll later appears in the credits scene in episode 8, implying that she was never truly killed and was still alive in some form. If Sin and Doll were seemingly able to survive having their cores destroyed, think of the precedent that sets for all solver hosts, including Uzi. It would be one thing if solver hosts were hard to kill and could only be fully killed by destroying their cores, but because of the fact that they're effectively immortal and can survive without them, then just like that, all the tension and life and death stakes in this series are next to non-existent and meaningless. Even if Sin managed to consume every single solver host on Copper 9, who's to say they eventually wouldn't be able to overtake her body when they all merge with her? See the problem here? If there's no way for these hosts to be permanently killed, then at absolutely no point in the entire series are they even in any real danger, because they could just merge with whoever killed them and always come back, almost like a certain villain in another popular indie series about murderous robots. This is bad in Uzi's case because even if her core was completely destroyed and was reduced to nothing but ash, she could then just merge with whoever killed her like Sin did. And it's worse in Sin's case because she never gets a satisfying comeuppance for the horrors she's committed, and the root cause of all the conflict of the series is never resolved, even after the final episode. All for the sake of jingling some arbitrary cliffhanger keys in the viewer's face, while also hammering it into the audience's head that this is the end of the series and there will be no more episodes to continue this story. Unless you were to completely retcon this aspect in the solver and make the host permanently killable, then it doesn't really matter what you do with any characters affected by it now, as the solver hosts have become too hard to kill and immortal for any danger they face to really mean anything, and their fake-out deaths don't even have any lasting consequences since the viewer already knows that they're just gonna come back. While we're on the topic of fake-out deaths, the murder drones having backup bodies also significantly dampened any stakes the series could have had, because even if they died, then their consciousness could then just get transported to a new one. Rather than having these clones be completely different individuals without the memories of the original, Jay is essentially just a carbon copy of herself with all the memories she had previously, meaning that there's no nuance to this plot point. What's even worse is that this plot point was only ever used once throughout the entire show just to bring her back, and not the several disassembly drones in Cabin Fever Labs. Speaking of which, there's also a line in episode 7 from Sin herself that basically implies that N, V, and J are the only MD squad that retain their personalities. While this might not even be true and could have just been a case of Sin trying to manipulate N as she's done in the past, if what she said actually was true, then it effectively meant that the entire plot of the series hinges on one massively contrived event. Oh yeah, the squad that lands outside of Uzi's colony out of the numerous other squads that may have existed, just so happens to be the only ones who have retained their personalities and are able to form relationships with our protagonist. This not only outright kills the potential for new characters, which honestly just feels like an excuse to shut down the potential of telling more stories in this universe, but also makes the actual events of the show feel even more contrived. If literally any other murder drone squad landed outside of Uzi's colony instead of Sin's favorites, the main events of the show would either end up never happening, or the entire show's plot would be very different. Because the personalities of these disassembly drones were completely wiped and reduced to hollow psychopathic killing machines, this would completely destroy the notion that the murder drones are somewhat human characters, and prevent Uzi from developing a relationship with any of them, causing her to not develop the same way she does throughout the show, likely leading to her becoming consumed by the solver. I mean, I guess if Khan and Thad were relevant characters, I suppose they could help Uzi and stop her from regressing to a monster, and I feel like Dahl would be able to help too to some extent, but I think it'd be a much weaker story than just having the murder drones be human characters who are simply forced to do what they do out of external forces, such as fear, oppression, or threats of violence from Sin. I honestly think that's way more impactful than them just being mindless killing machines. I could have so many more complaints with how this plot point negatively impacts the series as a whole, but we'll have to stop here because we're already getting off topic as it is. So what can we learn from all this? While killing off your characters is a devastating gut punch for your audience and yourself if you're attached to them, it's important because this can help establish stakes in your story and shows the audience how much danger everyone in the conflict faces. If you don't commit to this, it can make the story's conflict feel cheap and the stakes non-existent, effectively destroying all tension and immersion that it could have had, which I honestly feel is a major issue that Murder Drone suffers with, especially in the final episode. Perhaps I'll do a rewrite of Absolute End one day, along with a semi-personal remake of Murder Drones to tie in with the lore of my own project, as that final episode made some questionable decisions with its plot and characters. Speaking of questionable things, I've noticed that some people are particularly attracted to Sin's design in the final 2 episodes, in which she's literally wearing a dead child's skin. Do I need to explain why this is completely and utterly fucked up? If you are unironically attracted to this thing, then unsubscribe right now. People like you are not welcome here.
Oh, and Father Andrew here, cutting in real quick to say, I fully agree with Wizard. People like you are not welcome here. Unsubscribe and leave. Anyway, do continue, Wizard.
Anyway, that's a general explanation of the solver, how it functions, how it affects its hosts, and its flaws within the series itself. If you like these kind of videos, then I recommend subscribing to Andrew's channel, though if you could also subscribe to mine and save it from dying out completely, that would be nice. Anyway, this is Cartoon Wizard signing off. Goodbye.